And to order. Now recognizing the Minister to introduce his staff.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. With me on my left is Trevor Hughes. He's my Deputy Minister. And Michael Tanner, our Executive Director, Policy of Legislation in the back here. And Jake Ayers is our Director. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Shall Clause 1 pass?
Aye.
Member.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Minister, just be able to just share with this House what consultation was undertaken with any industry associations with respect to the preparation of this legislation?
That's right.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. In 2018, the review panel undertook a public consultation process during its comprehensive review of the code. The panel was appointed by me to give suggestions about labor code changes, and that's what they did. They went around the province, and they received submissions. The issues addressed in this bill, they were well canvassed in the review panel's process. This include about 108 written submissions and replies, 98 emails, 83 oral presentations from stakeholders and individuals at 10 public meetings in communities across BC, and meetings with several groups, including BC Federation of Labour, BC Business Council, the Arbitrators Association of BC, the Labour Relations Board, and the Labour subsection of Canadian Bar Association. So extensive consultation took place. Many submissions came from all those who would be impacted by those changes, and we took those suggestions and we brought in legislation at that time, but there were one area that was we were not successful in putting it in that particular bill, and we're doing it now.
Recognizing the member of Shuswap.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the Minister, has there been any consultation since 2018? The Minister references some consultation work that was undertaken over 4 years ago now. Just ask if the Minister can share any recent consultation that's been undertaken with any industry associations, say in the last 2 years since the last time that the minister was moving forward with legislative amendments for the Labour Code.
Minister.
Consultation since we brought the legislation last time, but we learned from the panel's recommendations who went around and did the consultation on our behalf, and we implemented almost all of those recommendations. But since that time, both the employer group and the workers groups have been reaching out and talking about different issues that they have about labor relations in British Columbia and their concerns, and sometimes they do come up with suggestions.
Recognizing member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Your Honourable Chair. The minister references information or concerns, I guess, that's come forward to the minister's attention, both from employers groups as well as employees. Would the minister be so kind as to just kind of elaborate on the breadth of those concerns, how those concerns are documented, are any of those concerns made public, and if the minister would be able to share any of those concerns and comments with this House?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I again go back to the panel's report. There were three-member panel, and it was on this one particular area when we were talking about a single-step certification, split decision on this. Two members felt that we should leave the secret ballot 2 steps in place, but they recognize, all three recognize that there is a concern about employer interference during the time the application for certification is made and when the secret ballot vote takes place during that time. And but they said, well, leave the 2 steps now. The majority said, but they recognize the interference during this period of time, and they recommended changes to see if this will stop the interference. And their recommendation was to reduce the time between the application and the certification vote from 10 days to 5 days, 5 business days versus 10 calendar days. And but the third member was very articulate in her views that no, that area need to be fixed because we have evidence of interference. We need to fix it now. But we adopted the recommendations and left the 2-step certification process in place. But the panel also made it very clear that the secret ballot and the right to vote works only if there's no interference. And we have since heard from the groups that 2-step certification process still leave interference by employers, and therefore it impede the right to association by the workers that is enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedom in Canadian Constitution. So we are hearing folks on both sides, similar to what happened during the panel discussions. Employer side was saying, leave it, don't change it. But the worker side were saying, we need to fix it because the change that you brought in are not helping or stopping the employer interference during certification. So there are a number of correspondences about that. But I mean, in a nutshell, excuse me, that's where it was. The employer side was saying, as they said before the panel recommendation, and after, don't touch it, leave it. And the workers and their representative were saying, it's not working, interference still goes on, fix it.
Recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the minister's positioning on it, but the minister did indicate that there was correspondence that was received by his office with respect to this piece of legislation with moving forward from the current 2-step to a single-step certification process. My question through you, Mr. Chair, to the minister was that the correspondence that the minister received, that in large part I understand that he's relying upon in order to move forward with this legislation, is that information, are those submissions available for the public record? And is the minister willing to share those with this House?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think I have said many times, and we were very clear during our 2 election platform promises in 2017 and 2020 that the right to unionize for the workers must be maintained. In fact, it became part of my mandate letter as well, to ensure that every worker has the right to join a union, to bargain for collectively, good wages and benefits and health and safety for themselves. Again, I think I've said it before, and I'm going to repeat it again. This issue here And then we took that position in 2017, 2022 elections, clearly that it is not about unions, it is not about employer. It is about British Columbians' right to association. That is enshrined in the Constitution of Canada, in Charter Rights and Freedom. That they should be able to exercise their right to association with no interference by anybody. And we've seen evidences of that. That there is a interference by employer during the two-step certification process. So to ensure that the workers can exercise their right to association, this is by far the best, I think, opportunity for workers to exercise that right without being threatened, fear of losing their job, and without intimidation and coercion. And I think that's why the intent behind is just that, so that the workers can exercise their right to association.
Recognizing member for Hugh Schwab.
Well, thank you, Honourable Chair. My questions have to do with the consultation that was undertaken and the information that the minister has provided, or certainly shared with me, with respect to the correspondence that his office has received with respect to the tabling of this particular bill. The minister can continue to regurgitate his second reading speech about the reasons, but we're going into the detail of this specific legislation. And through you again, through you, Mr. Chair, to the minister, is the minister willing to share with this House the correspondence and information that his office has received, both from the employers as well as the employee groups? And again, it was the information that the minister has shared with this House that was in part what has triggered the ministry and government to move forward with this piece of legislation. Is the minister willing to share that correspondence with this House? Is it available for the public record?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Excuse me. And I have said that employer always took the position that we should not make any changes and keep the two-step certification process in place. In fact, I recall soon before government, there was an op-ed by a very prominent labor lawyer who represent employers' side, Tom Roper, and Jock Finlayson. I think they put a joint letter together, if I recall it. I can't recall it exactly where the letter was, but I read the correspondence. saying that we should not touch two-step certification. So employer all along never showed any desire to change, make any changes to the two-step certification. But the workers on the other side, their representative have soon be made some changes, and they saw some cases going to the labor board and unfair labor practices. They start reaching out to our office. And I've got one letter. I didn't bring every correspondence here, but if the member need to have those later, we can dig them out. But here's the one from, it's October 29, 2021, from BC Building Trades. You know, I could read this letter went to the Premier. And I will just quote a couple of paragraphs. It's time for BC to restore balance to the industry by revising the labor code to give workers in construction meaningful access to unionize if they choose, by restoring one-step certification through card check. The rating period for construction for changing union representation should be set for July and August of each year, so that it falls at the time when workers are working and can participate in the process. So that's the approach. I mean, this is one area, Mr. Speaker, where the two stakeholders take two divergent positions. Employer side would like to keep the two-step, and the worker side and their representative would argue that single step is the only the way to stop the interference by employers, and they're saying why worker have to prove twice that they like to choose to join a union. So I think those are the two positions, and I respect both sides. But as a government, we have to make a decision that there is a balance. We fall back when it comes to the balance and what is the right thing to do, fall back on the worker. Not the union side, not the employer side. It is the worker's right, and they're the only one who should be exercise that right. They're the only one who have that right, and no one should have any right to interfere. So that's why we made 2 elections in a row. We made that as a position in 2017 and 2020, that every worker should have the right to join a union, to bargain health and safety and a good collective agreement for themselves, and that's why we're doing it.
Recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Well, the Minister has referenced an op-ed, I believe by the BC Business Council, Jock Finlayson, I believe was the name that the Minister had referenced. So there's an article that the member has some recollection of from the representing the employer's position. Also references a letter that was submitted to him from the BC Building Trades. The Minister has shared with this House. It's not about businesses, organizations, it's not about unions, it's about the workers. I'm certainly hoping that there's more substantive communication that the Minister received that led to the tabling of this legislation. So 2 parts. One is I'll ask yet a further time if the Minister is able to share with this House the correspondence that he has referenced, that he relied upon as part of his decision to move forward with this legislation. Is it available for the public record? Is he willing to share with this House the fulsome information? It was provided both by individuals, might be representing business organizations, and those representing workers. But the second part of the question, through you, Mr. Chair, is that, you know, the Minister referenced that this is not about unions and not about business organizations, but about the workers. Can the Minister share with this House any correspondence that he's received directly from workers, unionized or otherwise, with respect to their rights and his desire to move forward with tabling of this legislation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. There are some individual workers who I have some stories about, Mr. Speaker. We will not use their full names. Lynn told this: after our first unionization attempt, my employer made a bunch of promises and upgrade our lunchroom with the new appliances and cutlery, which entered the union drive. After a year, the improvement my employer committed to never happened, so I started up the union drive again with some of my peers. I openly supported both union drives at my workplace and even spoke with my management about it because I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. But management ended up firing me without any cause after 15 years of service. Same day, management also fired my friend that I was working with to unionize our workplace. So there are other stories like that that came our way. Others came through their union representatives, people who actually organize or who are involved in organizing drives. You would not get individual stories come here to the minister's office. It would be their representatives reaching out to us, just like the letter that I read, why a single-step certification process is needed, and what are the flaws when we leave the secret ballot and two-step certification process, and what workers have to go through. And I just give you an example, another worker saying that they were fired because they talked about a union during the certification vote. So there are other examples we could share with the member, but I think at the end of the day, the issue is that the unfair labor practices continued after we made the changes. The employer interference continues after we made the changes, because that's exactly what the panel said, that implement these changes, which we did, and then they went on to say that if these changes do not prevent employer interference, then there will be a compelling case for card check. And we've seen that interference has not stopped, and therefore we're moving ahead.
Recognizing the member for Saanich Island, North and Islands. My apologies.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. In my second reading speech, I invited the minister to provide, because in the minister's speech, he suggested there are cases upon cases, examples upon examples, I think are the direct quote. And I invited the minister to provide those here in this. And I appreciate the single instance of an individual writing the ministry. I was hoping and to hear that the minister is remaining, I think, as vague as he was in the second reading speech. I was hoping that the minister could come and demonstrate the situation has eroded from 2019 where it was to where it is, or and what specific actions have been taken to remedy that other than changing this legislation, because presumably the Labor Relations Board has a responsibility for enforcement of the rules. Because so what steps have been taken within the Labor Relations Board to remedy the situation where currently, as the minister would put it, workers' rights are not being workers' right to association, right to unionize, is being disrupted?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Thank you. And I used a couple of examples all along what the board did and why there's a case, a compelling case, I would say, to move to the card check. February 2022, the LRB ruled that an electrical contractor on Vancouver Island improperly interfered with their workers' attempt to organize their workplace with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, with tactics such as threatening layoffs. Then the other one is October 2022. The LRB ruled that a food processing company in Okanagan improperly fired 2 workers for attempting to organize their workplace with the UFCW. So there are examples, and those are the 2 examples I used. But the Labor Board data also shows that between 2019, 20, and 21, the certification rate went up compared to 2015, 16, and 17. But at the same time, unfair labor practices went up as well. So unfair labor practices is a sign, as the panel would show, that there is employer interference. Now, it happens for a variety of reasons. Well, one of the main reason why there's unfair labor practices complaint filed with the Labor Board is interference by employer, unlawful interference, I would say, during the certification process.
Recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back to the consultation, I've asked about 3 times now if the minister is willing or able to share copies of the correspondence that his office has received that, as the minister has indicated, he partially relied upon with respect to the table of this legislation. I can ask at a further time, and I guess if the minister is unwilling to share that, would the minister at the very least provide any kind of numbers with respect to the amount or the quantity of communications that his office received, either from employers, union organizations, or workers? The minister did share one example of a letter that was actually, and he actually read it into the record, and I believe that the minister had indicated that the worker was terminated, and I guess, obviously speculative on what the reasons for that termination was. I'm assuming that the minister likely didn't talk to the employer. So, I'd certainly hope that our Minister of Labor wouldn't just take a letter from one individual and make a firm decision with respect to, what the intention or what the actual outcome was, without at least providing an opportunity for the employer to provide equal commentary with respect to that particular worker. But back to the question, we're right at the very start here, just on the amount of consultation was undertaken. So again, is the minister willing to share with us how many pieces of correspondence was received by his office from workers, union organizations, or from business associations with respect to the tabling of this legislation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Look, many stakeholders in my ministry, number of stakeholders from representing different interests come and meet with me, but a couple of key stakeholders that have interest in our ministry is the trade union movement and the employer and their associations, their representatives. And I have met with both sides on numerous occasions on numerous different issues. Many times the employer and the union side will bring in health and safety issues, the WCB issues, and others will bring in issues about the employment standard, temporary foreign workers, And the card check issue, the single-step certification issue, have been brought to my attention by the union side number of times. And then there are correspondence. I don't know how many actually there are, but there will be a number of them. But there were meetings where they brought up these issues. And I think it's overwhelmingly the union side was pushing to have the card check bring in immediately. Employer side never talked about it because I've got their message, don't do anything. And here's another worker. He said, I'm keeping the identity, whether it's a he or she, but I mean it could be any one of those. So when my co-workers and I were waiting for our union vote, all of the kids of the managers were given time at work to wander around telling people not to support the union for a variety of reasons. They kept on harassing me and wouldn't leave me alone. Here's another one. I can tell you this one was from the entertainment industry. The one that I read earlier was from the retail industry, and this one is from the hospitality industry. My supervisor told me that I shouldn't speak with any of the people who were trying to bring in the union. Otherwise, I won't be scheduled anymore. I mean, there are examples out there. And when we talk about unfair labor practices, many show up at the LRB because some union would like to bring the issue to the LRB and complaint, and sometimes others don't. So you only know what comes to the labor board. And, but they will bring their personal experiences to my office when the stakeholders come and meet with us. So I also, again, go back to the panel. The member from Saanich asked, this may be another example the member probably would be interested in. They did some research. They said between 1990 and 2007, 254 unfair labor practices complaints were filed with the board, of which 197 were against an employer, 54 against a union, and 3 against individuals. Of the 197 complaints filed against employers, 152 were found to have been wholly or partially meritorious. Over 90% of the complaints and findings of the code breaches involved either unlawful termination or communication during organizing drive or combination of the two. So it's there are sufficient evidence, even since we brought Bill 30. Unfair labor practices continue on, and you're hearing these stories from these workers and their representatives, unions who are involved in the organizing drive. And I can tell you, Honorable Chair, I was organizer one time. And I have first-hand experience what goes on during those times. And I've seen what the employer has done, which was unlawful. And but again, employer has unrestricted access to those workers during the organizing drive, during the working hours. Unions on the other side are not allowed to do any union campaign during the working hours, or the workers themselves cannot talk to each other during the working hours. So that is not allowed. So I think there's an unfair level playing field. There's a tremendous amount of significant power imbalance where employer can terminate somebody, and they can shut the plant down, they can move the plant, and but the workers on the other side are only relying on what they know at that particular time. All they want is exercise their right to association, as they have learned growing up that they have that right under the Constitution to join or the right to association or join union of their choice, and to bargain collectively for better working conditions and wages and benefits. And workers feel that their rights are being interfered with, and therefore they have reached out to our offices time and again that single-step certification is the way to stop that interference.
Recognizing member Xu Shua.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Well, it's quite apparent that there's been a limited, if any, real active consultation with respect to Bill 10 that's before us here today. I've asked the minister if he'd be willing to share copies of information and the communication that he's received, and he's refused to provide any definitive answer back, which is troubling. Because, you know, for a government, I think it's important for the general public and certainly the official opposition to have a good understanding of clearly what is motivating this government and what is motivating this minister to move forward with very important legislation. In this case, legislation that will actually take away, it won't add additional protections, it'll actually take away one of the most fundamental democratic rights we have in society, and that's our ability to make our decision in secret without anybody's knowledge, whether it's the employer, whether it's a union organization. Having that secret ballot is incredibly important. And so it's troubling that the minister is unwilling to share with this House the fulsomeness of the information from which he's now relying upon. Through you, Honourable Chair, to the minister, the minister references, obviously, the work that was undertaken by the panel back in 2018. When the minister previously brought forward Bill 30, and I believe that was in 2019, when the minister brought forward Bill 30 back in 2019, was it the intention of the minister to accept the recommendations of the panel with the tabling of Bill 30?
Minister.
Honourable Chair, I just want to, don't want to be difficult, but Clause 1 is about a rating period in construction. It's not about card check. But, you know, I agree that, you know, we want to give as much latitude as we can to the member, because I know they want to canvass as broadly as they want, and I don't want the debate to be shut down on technicalities, you know, unnecessarily, but sometimes you have to. But anyway, the member talk about, you know, panel recommendation and what I did. You know, I want to read this for record. Much has been talked about by the opposition in the House about the workers' right to secret ballot as one fundamental democratic right that we all enjoy. But they failed to go back to the panels. Panel examined that particular issue extensively, and they wrote extensively before they gave their suggestions and recommendations. And I'll read that for the benefit of those who may be watching. That this is panel's quotes. A secret ballot process gives rise to two main concerns: the potential for delay and unlawful employer interference. Under a secret ballot system, employers have more opportunity and incentive to engage in unlawful union avoidance. Longer time frames for certification votes or lax compliance negatively impact the success rate for certification. However, employer unfair labor practices continue to be concerned under the card check system. This is key, while secret ballot votes are integral to our democratic political system, we recognize that the certification vote occur in very different circumstances than political votes. Certification votes occur in the context of the power imbalance between employers and workers in the workplace. Employers control the operation of the business, have the right to fire employees and can curtail or close business. Unlike political votes, Section 7 of the code limits unions' ability to communicate with the workers during working time. Employer, on the other hand, have an unrestricted ability to do so throughout the workday. Political candidates have voters list, while in the certification context, unions have limited information to determine the bargaining unit constituency. So, Mr. Speaker, they differentiated the right to secret ballot between a political secret ballot vote and a certification vote. There is a day and night difference, and panel listed that as I read their report. You cannot stand up in a lunchroom, say, look, we are for this union, or we are against that union, or we want to bring in union, and everyone should join with me, and let's reach out to the union. You know what chances are, if any worker does that, they will not be working there any longer. And then the case will be fought, and you go through the LRB, and you may win, you may not win, but those are the realities of workplace so-called democracy. There is no, because panel also went on to say somewhere out there that the workplaces are not democratic institutions. They're there to produce product or provide services. And work now, grieve later is the norm. You know, you may feel that you are being dealt unfairly, but you cannot say no unless it's a health and safety issue for you particularly. You must do it and then grieve it. Then there's a process about grievance. But the same thing in the certification is even more serious. Certification votes, people are scared, they don't want to talk about it, and because they know the consequences could be that they have no more job. And Mr. Speaker, that's where that is. I can go back to the panel and what my recommendations was, and I think I'll ask when we introduce the bill at that time, that if you had the support of a third party, would you have brought in card check? I clearly said yes. That would have been my preference. And I said that in 2007, we said that in 2017, we said that in 2020 again. But we follow the panel's recommendations, and they felt that those changes could bring the changes that are desired to stop and prevent unfair labor practices and employer interference. Since that time, I felt maybe that would be the case as well. But we still see unfair labor practices, still see cases of employer interference. That's why we're doing it.
Recognizing member Hugh Schwab, please stay on clause 1.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill 30 specifically relates to clause 1, because Bill 30 included language which provided the opportunity for union rating in each and every calendar year. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I think for workers in this province, the former Green Party leader was unwilling to support that clause and actually tabled an amendment specifically pulling that out. So, I think it's important for those who might be listening at home, my line of questioning in reference to Bill 30 does have direct correlation to clause 1. But I think what's important is the minister is standing here today and sharing with this House that, he's honoring the recommendations of the panel. However, in 2019, the minister chose not to heed the recommendations of the panel, was actually looking to move forward both with the scrapping of the secret ballot and also with moving forward, and actually tabled the legislation to allow for union rating in each and every calendar year, which the minister had to walk back because of the opposition and concerns raised by the former Green Party leader. So here we are. The minister did not get his way or his government's way back in 2019. Now moving forward with this legislation now, the minister referenced one letter from the BC Building Trades Those are the 19 hand-picked select unions that the minister has identified and given sole work to for all of Trans-Canada Highway major expansion projects, the Potola Bridge, now with some infrastructure, some vertical construction projects with construction of the Cowichan Lake Hospital and the new BCIT trades training facility. And so I think it's pretty apparent who's calling the shots and what is actually driving the direction of this minister with the tabling of this legislation. But back to the consultation piece, through you, Honourable Chair, to the minister. Is the minister able to share what consultation has been undertaking with First Nations, either by the previous committee, the expert panel, prior to 2018, the tabling of their report, and any subsequent or further consultation that has been undertaken with First Nations, especially with the tabling of the UNDRIP and DRIPA legislation that this government is seeking to fully implement.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. There was, my understanding, no direct formal consultation this particular time. But in developing this legislation, I'm advised that we completed an assessment that confirmed that it aligns with the rights described in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and our obligation under Section 3 of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act.
Recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thank you to the minister for that. Through you, Honourable Chair, to the minister. Is the minister able to provide that note or that internal reference that detailed the determination of this minister that this legislation falls within the scope of DRIPA?
Minister.
Honourable Chair, I gave a high-level information about that particular question. I'm advised that was legal advice and it cannot be shared.
Recognizing member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. The minister has read in some of the commentary with respect to the expert panel report. And I thought just with respect to the relationship that the government previously had with the Green Party, so I'd read in, into the record some concerns that were raised by Andrew Weaver. I guess we can say his name now that he's no longer a sitting member. Andrew Weaver, former leader of the BC Green Party, who was in a confidence supply agreement with government at the time, some of his concerns, which led to the minister actually pulling out the removal of the secret ballot from Bill 30, the legislation that was tabled in 2019. And this is a quote from an article, I believe it was written by the esteemed Vaughn Palmer back in December of 2020. And in it, this is a quote from this article. The signatures were still fresh on the NDP Green Power Sharing Agreement when Weaver announced his preference for the secret ballot. And this is a quote from Weaver. Now, I know from firsthand experience that in any certification drive, there are those people who feel reassured to sign a certification card, but they want the opportunity to have a secret ballot, he said. Dr. Weaver goes on to say, I will never support legislation that will eliminate the secret ballot, he told reporters the month before Horgan took office, the Premier took office with Green Party support. It is simply not going to happen, and no amount of convincing will ever convince me to do that. He goes on to say that not that the New Democrats didn't try to convince him. Weaver would later recount lobbying from NDP politicians, staffers, and their allies in the trade union movement. His stance got a boost when a government-appointed review panel on changes in the Labour Code reported back in 2018. The panel recommended sticking with the status quo secret ballot for stability's sake, citing 4 swings in the certification process through each change of government over 35 years. Weaver seized on that recommendation in refusing to budge in Green Party support for the secret ballot. The significant policy swings we've seen are incompatible with predictability, certainty, or balance, he said. If they, the NDP, ignored the expert advice, we'll push them back to the expert advice. And apparently he did so, for when the minister prepared to table amendments to the Labour Code in the spring of 2019, Weaver offered to bet reporters that the secret ballot would remain untouched. Quote, I'll bet you $100, he teased. I'll even give you 2-to-1 odds. There were no takers, and a few minutes later, the minister ended the non-suspense by announcing that the highlights of the legislation include maintaining the current secret ballot vote for certification. So here we are with a single letter, as read into the record from the minister from the BC Building Trades, and we have a piece of legislation that moves directly forward with the 2 recommendations that the Building Trades has asked for, 1 for the scrapping of the secret ballot, and 2 for the accommodation to allow for union rating in each and every construction year. 1 letter from the Building Trades Unit and a piece of legislation tabled here today. Mr. Chair, in the sake of time, we're almost an hour in and have only got to the consultation piece. So through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, were there any briefing notes or decision notes that the Minister signed or was aware of, or any drafts that were reviewed in preparation for the tabling of this legislation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Yes, I think in in order to prepare a legislation, there is a process. Once the government and the minister decide a certain direction and to draft legislation, then there is that process. I do get briefing notes, decision notes, and with sometime options. And yes, I get them, but I'm not even sure whether they're FYable. I'm not advised they could be, but those are the advice to the minister, and yes, I do get them.
Recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and thank you through you to the minister for that response. Is the minister able to share what was the rationale for specifically making changes to union rating for construction only? Just wondering through you, Mr. Chair, Honorable Chair, if the minister can provide the reasons or justification or rationale on why this provision for allowing for union rating in each and every construction year is only applicable to the construction trades.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think if you go into different jurisdictions, there is a special sections in the labor code to deal with specialized workers in different sectors. Construction, again, also is treated differently because the nature of business. Other jurisdictions have, specialized kind of language to deal with different sectors. And why, in this particular case, moving from 30-year and if a longer collective agreement than 3 years, then every year after that, is the reason that most construction projects last 2 years or under, 3 years or under. And it's different than having a widget factory which runs year-round and year after year after year. And there are mills and factories, and I'm sure in the members' case, their business probably there for years, decades. And so that's why they're treated differently. The construction workers felt that if they wish to choose a different union, and by leaving the language that you can only raid or change union after the third year or during the third year of your collective agreement, they will miss out on many opportunities because those projects will end 3 years or sooner. And I think that was the rationale behind it, and I accepted that, and that's why we made those changes.
Recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. A couple of questions that kind of flow from the minister's response. The minister indicated that it's construction workers that were actually looking for that opportunity to actually be able to change or have choice to move to a different union in each and every construction year. Through you, Honorable Chair, to the minister, can the minister provide any information with respect to how that advice was provided? Was it directly from workers or was it from union organizations? And if it was from union organizations, specifically which union organizations were looking for that? And then the other question I have for the minister talked about construction projects. Now, it's certainly my understanding that the project isn't subject to a rate, it's the corporation or the company that is actually subject to the rate. So just if the minister can also clarify, when they talk about the potential for workers' choice on a construction project, is it the project that is subject to the raid, or is it the company? Because I do know, like lots of large companies, don't need to name them, but large construction companies may have multiple projects going on across the province in all different areas. They may even have factories where they also have workers in a permanent location, potentially all covered under the same collective bargaining unit. And so when the minister talks about the ability for workers to have choice to move to a different union organization, is the minister referring to just the specific project, a construction project, like a highway expansion project, Or is it indeed the company that is actually subject to the raid, which would mean that the entire organization with maybe thousands of workers all across BC would now be subject to raiding in each and every construction year?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I think the member raised a question, but member, you also, I think you know, that it is the bargaining unit. It could be a project-specific bargaining unit. It could be a company that take on two different, and they could be have same employees, and if the certification, reflect that the project A, project B is a one certification, but it could be one project certification. So it is the employer, of course. But again, if the project is over, employees are not working. And that's why the employees were saying, and their representative were saying that when the employees are, that's why, rather than 7 and 8 a month, we made changes last time to have the open season on July and August. Because that's when majority of the workers are working, and that's why majority of the workers should have a say if they wish to change the union or not. If it's a winter time, if no one's working, very few people are working, then very few people can decide. So I think that there are some issues there. I agree with you, but it is the employer and the certification and the description of the certification, the appropriateness of the certification, and that's how the rating will take place, and the labor board will decide whether there's an appropriate unit for rating, and whether the rating union has sufficient support. I think those are decisions made at the labor board. But it is, again, if the projects are while they are operating, the workers should have the right to change union if they want, when most of them are working. And if the project's over, then they're moving, they're not there, maybe somewhere else, and then I think it's very difficult for employees to change and exercise that right.
Recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thanks for the response from the Minister. So, as I understand it, it's not always specific to one project. The bargaining unit could have multiple projects underway, and it could have workers in various areas. So when the Minister gives reference to potential rating, it wouldn't just necessarily affect a specific job. It could, in many instances, affect multiple jobs or multiple workers that could be working at multiple locations across the province. The first part of the question that I asked was with respect to the Minister's answer about construction workers actually asking for this specific change within the construction industry. Just wanted to see if the minister has a response for that question. So maybe I'll just repeat it. The request was, can the minister share with this House how many workers actually were involved in the construction trade that were actually asking for this change, or if it indeed was union organizations, potentially building trade organizations that were actually asking for this specific change. And again, it comes back to my first question, which is why only construction? Why not other industry sectors across the province?
Minister.
Chair, excuse me, I have answered the question why construction are treated differently, and I think my answer, I thought was quite elaborate. But who approached us for this? It's largely through their unions, and a number of different unions came to us over time. Actually, some of them came to us right after the panel issued their report back then, and they brought to our attention some of the issues that haven't been dealt with in the panel's recommendations. And so I think listening and understanding, analyzing all those concerns, and we believe that there is a legitimacy in their argument that number one, when we brought Bill 30 in 2019, we moved the rating period and the open season for rating from 7th and 8th months to July and August every year. And but rating period we had in our bill at that particular time, rating to be allowed every year, which amendment through the amendment it was not. We were not able to successfully pass in the House, and the amendment passed. Amendment is what we have current language, and but the issue remains, and that's why we are bringing these changes. And the member earlier on said the card checks, we had to pull. I want to correct the member. We did not pull because it was not part of our bill at that time. We knew that we will not get support, so we did not include in the bill the card check. But we did have a rating open season every year, which through amendment was defeated, and now we're bringing it back because those concerns remain.
Recognize the member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. The minister in his response referenced request by largely, I'm assuming, the building trade union representatives to allow for the potential rating in each and every construction year, the 7th and 8th months, July and August of each and every construction year. According to the 2018 report, and this was the report entitled Recommendations for Amendments to the Labour Relations Code, there was, and I quote, considerable support from unions and employers for reducing the frequency of the open periods for raids to correspond to other Canadian jurisdictions. Through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, what consultation led to the decision to increase the open period for raids?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So I think for members' benefit and those who may be listening, before the panel came with the recommendations, it was always every year. Rating period was every year, but in construction, it was 7th and 8th months of every year. That was the open season. But the panel listened, went around, and took the many suggestions from different groups, and they decided that yes, it is disruptive. It is very divisive when there is a raid going on. One union, is trying to convince the organized workers in a plant or project or company to move over to them. It can get very divisive. Yes, that's why they recommended that third year of the agreement, and then every year after that, if collective agreement is longer than 3 years. And when the report came, I had presentation by a number of construction unions, including Teamsters. There was one area where they left out in their definition of construction, Teamsters out, and they felt that was a mistake, and that they need to. So we changed that small part, tweaked it, and because they are always have been a major part of the construction unions, and we made that change, and also recognized from their presentation that construction is unique, and to give those workers right. Because the nature of the work that they do, the projects are 2 year, 3 years, and they will not have that type of opportunity as other workers outside of construction has, because they have, the factories there, the workers there for a long time, but project by project in construction, it was argued with us that we should have kept what was originally there every year, except to change the rating open season from January or winter times to July and August, because some unions conveniently, I was advised, sign a collective agreement where 7th and 8th month come January and February, where hardly any worker is working, or sometimes not very many are working. So if you start rating at that time, then you are you're not able to reach out to majority of the workers who may be laid off at that time. So I think that's why we did that.
Recognizing the member for Hugh Schwab.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The Minister raises an interesting point. Minister indicated that unions would actually purposely, identify their anniversary date or the signing of a collective agreement such that the time by which they may be subject to rating would be in the winter months when there's low employment. Just through you, Honorable Chair, to the Minister, can the Minister, is the Minister aware of any examples of where that has happened, where unions would purposely try and establish an anniversary date such to try and preclude the maximum number of workers from participating in a raid? It seems a bit odd.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I just want to again let the member know that change is not in this bill. That change came in, I think we debated this during that time, moving from January, February to July, August. And it was the representation by unions telling us that maybe I should not say some unions would, but I think we were told that some collective agreements, their they're such that their 7th and 8th month falls in January, February. So it's not, that anybody by design do it, but collective agreement, their terms would make 7th, 8th months, that comes in January, February, where there are not very many workers working. So that was the issue brought to my attention.
Recognizing member Xu Shuang.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So the legislation is now that union rating is in each and every calendar year during the months of July and August. I'm assuming that for most people who might be listening from home would appreciate that July and August is the most productive construction time in our province. Certainly, as we're traveling around the province, especially with highway construction, that's typically when the majority and bulk of work is undertaken. And the minister also acknowledged the fact that the union raids are both divisive and extremely disruptive for employers. So at the peak of the construction season, when construction companies are either going to make it or break it, it's during those 2 months that government has chosen to allow for union raiding, providing different unions to have the maximum opportunity for disrupting the construction site at the peak of the construction season. And not only is it limited to every 3 years, the minister is now, through this legislation, putting that extra burden, pressure, stress on employees and employers in each and every construction season. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the minister, can the minister share with this House how he made the determination with the pretty significant impact it'll have on the construction trades to have union rating in each and every construction year with the right and necessity of companies to actually get work done? From conversations I've had, many construction companies indicate that once they've signed a collective agreement, at least they have labor peace. They know they have labor peace for the next 2 or 3 years, and they're not going to be subject to union rating in each and every construction year. And I would hope that most union organizations all have the best of intentions and are providing great representation for the employees. And so, going from one union to another, I don't know. Maybe there are bad unions and there's good unions. Maybe the minister could speak to that. But it's interesting that to provide through this legislation that opportunity for maximum disruption in the most productive time of the year for construction companies in each and every construction year, how that was top of mind for the minister and for this government, rather than to leave it status quo as the legislation currently exists.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. But I want to acknowledge the member acknowledging that the economy in British Columbia is booming, especially in the construction industry. More people are coming to British Columbia. As a result of that, I think part of the reason is the jobs are available. Part of the reason also is that we have good labor laws. Workers know when they come here that they have the highest minimum wage of all provinces. They know we have a very strong health and safety provisions through presumptions in many cases for the frontline workers. And construction continued to thrive in British Columbia even during the pandemic. And I'm really happy that the member acknowledged that, and I think we all benefit from it. But the member talked about the disruption. But like I said, that particular clause was changed in 2019, moving from 7th and 8th months to July and August. That's done deal. And all we are doing is every year now, instead of third year if the collective agreement is 3 years or longer. And, again, we must balance, the disruption versus workers' right under the Constitution to change union, join union, and the workers through their representative told us in the construction industry that they don't get the opportunity if you leave it the third year of the collective agreement, because many of the projects that they're working on may not be there. And also, when most of the workers are working, I think the majority should make a decision rather than select a few in January, February, as could be the case, which is not the true reflection of the majority. So I think there's a balance. The balance has to, I think, in my view as a minister and as a government, we need to look at both sides, and we need to look at the cost of democracy, and we look at the basic right that individuals have. That is enshrined under the Constitution: freedom of speech, freedom, right to association, and freedom rights and freedom. Sorry. So I think those are charter rights and freedom. Sorry, I meant to say. So those are the rights that are enshrined in the Canadian Constitution. So I think our job as a government is to ensure that they can exercise those rights without any interference by anybody.
Recognizing the member for Hugh Schwab.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Through to the Minister, can the Minister share or provide copies of any correspondence or any letters or concerns that were brought forward by workers that felt that their rights to choose or maybe move to a different unit were somehow negatively impacted by the current legislation, which allows for union rating only every 3 years? Or is it only just on the request and the behest of the building trades unions on why we're moving forward to provide that maximum opportunity for union organizations to disrupt construction sites in each and every construction year?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I will, well, first, no, I don't recall individual workers reaching out to us. It was through their representatives. Different unions representing construction workers approached us and talked to us. And I read one letter, which was from BC Building Trades. They clearly are talking about at a time when construction workers are in desperate need of collective agency and advocacy, the majority remain ununionized because the labor code lacks provisions that recognize the unique nature of the construction industry. And then they went on to say the relationship of construction workers to the workplace and their contractor is vastly different in construction than other stated industries. And so they mentioned the two that I read into the record previously. It is time for BC to restore balance in the industry by revising the labor code to give workers in construction meaningful access to unionize if they choose, by restoring one-step certification through card check. The rating period for the construction for changing union representation should be set for July and August of each year so that it falls at a time when workers are working and can participate in the process. Then they went on to say that these two measures are important, but to truly give workers access to collective bargaining, a sector-wide approach is needed. It is critical that a construction section of the labor code be created to address the unique nature of the industry by giving workers the ability to ratify an industry collective agreement registered with the Labor Board that is based on the bargaining unit on the certification. And the panel also recognized, and I will read some for record as well, the BC and Yukon Territory Building and Construction Trade Council and the Bargaining Council of BC Building Trade Unions, it's a Bargaining Council of BC Building Trade Union, expressed concern the current open period frequently require raids in the winter months when the construction workforce is at its lowest and the potential voting constituency is not representative. The panel recognized those are specific issues relating to raids in the construction industry.
Recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Well, it appears that BC Building Trades are able to send a letter to the minister with a recommendation, and the minister moves forward with legislation to basically to comply with their request. Significant negative impact from the minister's own admission with respect to being very divisive and causing challenges during the construction during the construction season. But you know, as we look to the current labor market, we're currently in the midst of a housing crisis. Everybody's well aware of that. It's driven largely by a lack of housing supply. There have already been major delays in construction of desperately needed housing stock. Has there been any assessment done as to how an increase in union raids during each and every construction year during the months of July and August might further delay housing construction?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think a couple of things. No, we haven't done any analysis on that. But again, I think I would be correct if I made the statement that most of the housing, residential construction is non-union. And also, I am just advised that last year there were only two rates, two applications. So it happens, but it doesn't happen that often. But again, I come back to the work. At least in those two occasions, the workers chose to change, and they have that opportunity to change, and they were able to change. And that's their right under the Constitution. That's where I come back to time and again, that it is about the workers. If they choose to change union, then they have that opportunity to change union. They want to join a union, they have the opportunity to join a union without any interference by anybody. And so I think the changes that were made through Bill 30, moving from January, February to July, August is kind of done deal. And also, I think I want to correct the member. I was paying attention. That member kept on saying that that every year or after, was it every 3 years? The
collective agreement's longer than 3 years. That's the third year and every year thereafter.
Right. So I want to make sure that the way it'll work is if the collective agreement is longer than 3 years, the raid can take place the third year of the collective agreement and every year after that. That's what the current rules are. That not every 3 years after that, as I think maybe member didn't want to say it, but I think that's the way it came out. So, but this one will do is because of the nature of the industry, many projects are shorter period, and workers should have the right to change union if they wish to change it during the time that the project is still on.
Member for Shuswap on clause 1.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and welcome to your seat. Through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, I've heard that many of the building trade unions have reciprocal agreements where they elect to not raid one another's unions. Is the Minister familiar with that reference, or the Minister did reference actually 2 raids that actually were undertaken last year? Maybe the Minister might be able to share with this House which specific unions were subject to those 2 raids last year.
Minister.
Mr. Chair, welcome. No, member, I don't have the names of the union, but I'm just advised through the information we received, the 2 raids took place successfully, and 2 applications, 2 raids.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Through you to the Minister, is that for public record? Is that information that the Minister could share?
Minister.
Part of LRB's annual report, and they have those kind of data available, and it's accessible to public.
Member.
Thank you, and through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister. Is the Minister familiar with any reciprocal agreements that building trade unions have, which my understanding is it may not be a written document, but basically a protocol or a practice where they agree not to raid one another's unions? Is the Minister familiar with that reference or terminology?
Minister.
The member said it's some kind of a unwritten arrangement. I am not familiar with any unwritten arrangement. Many may have. I have seen unions being raided by other unions, and so I don't know. I remember, and I don't know if it had anything to do with the bill before us.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And yeah, I appreciate the Minister's candid response. I think where it has applicability is at the level of union raiding. Obviously, if many of the building trade unions all have an agreement where they're not going to raid one another, then the impact of this bill may have limited impact. But anyhow, just going back to the question I had with respect to any work or analysis that might be undertaken by the ministry with respect to the potential impact or disruption for the construction trade associated with housing. The minister had shared that the large majority of private or single-family residential construction is non-unionized. But for a lot of the larger multi-complex or multi-story facilities that might be undertaken by unions, just wondering, just a bit of a follow-up, will any measures be put in place to mitigate any potential construction delays that might result from raids, or is there any contemplation about if raiding is taking place and it's negatively impacting large construction, large vertical construction projects? Is the minister attuned to that, or does the minister plan on monitoring in any way, shape, or form, trying to ensure that any union raiding that may happen on those sites has a minimal impact on the construction outcomes?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. We don't anticipate a lot of disruption or delays as a result of these changes to the residential construction projects that are underway. And like I said, there were 2 rating applications last year, and the annual report list challenges that comes LRB's way, and we will be monitoring it. And just like other policies, as we brought Bill 30, we analyzed it, we watched what the outcomes of those policies were and what impact it is leaving on people, and how is it improving workers' right to exercise their right to association. And I think that's the kind of monitoring we will do going forward to see what impact it would have going forward.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up on that, what I was interested in asking the minister about this with the clause around rating was exactly around what he just mentioned in response, which is what are the outcomes? And can the minister identify, for example, any indication of specific outcomes where this has improved workers' conditions?
Minister.
Honorable Chair, I think we will monitor after the changes are implemented. Right now, only change that we made through Bill 30 was to move from the open season for rating from January, February to July, August. But again, the other provisions remained that if the collective agreement is longer than 3 years, then the rate could take place only third year and every year after that. Now we're keeping the July and August period because the majority of the workers are working at that time, and majority should make a decision. And we are also in construction, particularly saying because the uniqueness, the short period of project length, that they should be able to change union every year. Now, again, I come back to not about the employer, not about the unions, it is about the workers. If they wish to change the union, during a project when they're working, then they should have the right without any interference or other roadblocks. Because construction, as I said before, that construction project, many of them do not last 3 years or longer. So if the projects are 2 years, then they will never have the opportunity to change union with the current language. So I think that's why we are changing the language that in construction only, they can change union if they wish to every year in July and August.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the critic for the official opposition was asking whether there were any specific letters or requests from workers, and the minister indicated that he didn't have that. But just to help me understand, what is the motivation for a union to raid another union?
Minister.
My answer to the member would be that there will be a number of different reasons why member number one choose to become member of the union and then choose to change that union. If the representation and the quality of representation could be one, their collective agreement could be another, that they're not happy. I mean, there could be a variety of reasons. I can tell you with my own experience, I have organized a unit where they were paid higher wages next door than, doing the same work. Their colleagues with the company next door, owned by the same company, 2 operations. And the reason they paid them higher was to keep the union out. But they paid them higher wages, but they came to me, they wanted to join a union. It was because the respect and dignity they were not getting. And they gave me examples that if the supervisor decide that I need 2 fewer workers after lunch, he or she will decide which those 2 go home. Whether the people have higher seniority who were sent home, and whether they were able to do the same quality of work, Didn't matter. It's because that particular day, that supervisor decided that was his decision. So those were, and then sometime how they're treated. So those were some of the reasons they came to us. So there are a number of reasons, depending on what members feel, individually or collectively, whether they are getting the representation they expected, and the health and safety also is important to them. And I think it's there. That's how those decisions are made. Why they change and why they join union is the reasons. There are a number of reasons. It's mostly is about quality of service and representation they get.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know the minister wants to keep bringing this back to workers, but he indicated earlier, for example, there were applications in for raids that the LRB would look at. Is that correct? Is that what, I believe that's what the minister indicated? Not currently, but that there's a process. How about this? Can the minister talk to me about the process for a raid?
Minister.
I can't remember. It's, excuse me, it's the same, almost same process with one exception as certification process. Members of that particular bargaining unit sometimes approach another union and say, look, we want to join your union. And then the union will have conversation with the workers, and then they sign up membership applications. And if majority of the workers sign up membership to join that new union, then that union will make an application to the board that we have majority of the workers who have shown interest in joining our union. Then the labor board will verify those signatures without anybody knowing, you might say. In certification, no one ever knows who signed those membership cards. No one ever knows if one or a few of them would withdraw their membership cards. That is to protect the workers from repercussions. And so in the raid or changing union, it's a similar process, except that they have only 2 months, July and August, to sign up majority of the workers and go to the board for certification.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think the minister said that there were 2 scenarios, and I got the one, but in this, it was the scenario that was just described. It's really the workers, and they want to find a new union, but that makes the potential union that would be coming in as a very passive actor in this. Is there a scenario where the union is the active actor?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. It's, again, chicken and the egg thing argument. Whether there usually is an interest in that bargaining unit. And then the union become active. If there's no interest shown by anybody, many times, union don't want to take that risk. And yes, union may decide to raid another union. That's their prerogative. But they have to find a worker to sign up. And how they find them, different unions use different kind of methods. Some stand outside their gates, just like a non-union operations. Sometimes they are invited by the workers, but no one knows that they were invited. So they'll go to the gate and hand out, as they're leaving the operation, hand out the application forms. Now the worker will go home and decide if they want to sign up and send it back to the union or not. And so usually it is the worker initiated, because there has to be some interest. And just like anything else, why would anybody waste any time and money if there's no interest coming out of a particular area? So usually it gives them the indication, if someone approached them, that there maybe is a dissatisfaction with their representation. So then one person approached them, and then that opened the door for them to, they will guide them to reach more people. And I think that's the process. It's different unions use different tactics, different workers, different employers use different tactics. So I think it's all over the map. There's no one particular strategy that the union or the workers use.
Member.
Thank you. And then that comes back to the first question that I asked, which is the motivation for the union. So say they've been approached, or they're standing outside the gate saying, hey, we're over here, we're going to be better. What's their motivation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think the motivation is that they were approached by someone from inside. They went to the gate. I mean, I was there, and I don't believe that in my time that I would decide one day, oh, let's go to that operation. They have a union, and let's see if they want to change the union. Usually there is a contact. Usually someone contact you. And that give you, then you have to do the analysis. How much support is there? Is that worker just upset over something for that particular day? Or there is a bigger dissatisfaction about number of things, about some really substantive stuff. They make that decision, yeah, I think it's worth going there. And we'll go there. And if the majority of them wish to join, they will fill up those applications. Then we'll take from there.
Shall Clause 1 pass? So ordered. Shall Clause 2 pass? So ordered. Shall Clause 3 pass? On Clause 3, recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Now, it's a little technical, but some of the language around the original Section 22, which is being amended by this section, has been reworked. However, the language in the previous Section 22, bracketed 1, is dropped, which says, and I quote, when a trade union applies for certification as the bargaining agent for a unit, the board must determine if the unit is appropriate for collective bargaining and may, before certification, include additional employees in or exclude employees from the unit, unquote. The language is then reworked in Section 22.1. Can the minister provide the rationale for this change? I'm just trying to understand what was the purpose behind this specific change in clause or in Section 22.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. It's just a restructuring of the language at the advice of the Legislative Council. If you look at 22.1 and 2, and then there's a 22.1. First one is a process relating to the application, and then it says determination of appropriate unit. That now becomes 22.1. The language hasn't changed, I'm advised, because 22.1 now reads, if a trade union is under the determination of appropriate unit, if a trade union applies for certification as the bargaining agent for a unit, the board, A, must determine if the unit is appropriate for collective bargaining, and B, may, before certification, include additional employees in or exclude employees from the unit. It's just a rearranging of the numbers and taking from one area and putting in a different one.
Member.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Well, I think that the removal of the term "must," I think, is important, and that's why that's why I'm raising the inquiry, I guess, or the concern, is that the board must determine if the unit is appropriate for collective bargaining and may. It sounds like the board has the determination to choose, and it's up to their discretion, whereas the previous language, I believe, where the minister referenced must. And so just wondering what legal advice was provided to give, I guess, that additional latitude to the board rather than to must, rather than to move forward with the reference to having choice with the term may.
Minister.
Thank you. I think the language is the same. Like I said, it's being rearranged at the advice of the council to flow it better. So 22, it says process relating to application, 22.1, 2. But then there was a 22 previous section, which is now is 22.1, which says the same thing. It says that if the trade union applies for certification as the bargaining agent for the unit, the board, A, must determine if the unit is appropriate for collective bargaining, which is the same language as the member was reading. And then it goes on, and B, may, before certification, include additional employees in or exclude employees. So I think that is the same language, but it is rearranged in different sections. That's right.
Member.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Chair. I've got some further questions, but I'd also like to just see if the minister can provide a bit more clarity with respect to additional employees in or excluding employees from the unit. What is the guiding principle that actually makes that determination with respect to who's in, who's out? Does it apply to workers that might be on maternity leave? Does it include workers that may be laid off? Just to have a bit better understanding on specifically which employees are being referenced.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Just want to assure the member that part is not being changed. It is that language is always there. Just for the benefit of the member, is that board, it's a long-standing policy of the board to determine what forms the bargaining unit. You know, the employees that the union is proposing to represent, do they fit the definition of bargaining unit? Because sometimes they mistakenly will see employee A should be part of the unit, but the board may find and the employer may argue, no, actually that particular person that they are including should be excluded. because they have a management duties, certain other duties, which does not fall within the bargaining unit. Or so-and-so should be, included, or the union may argue so-and-so should be included because they fit the definition of the bargaining unit, that they should be part of the union, and because they are not performing management work, for example, and they will come up with an example. But the board will determine. They have a long-standing policy. They will determine who should form the bargaining unit, who should not, and which employee should be part of the bargaining unit, which one should not. Then they will determine whether the union has sufficient support or not.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thank you, Minister, for that response. So the definition by which the board will make their ultimate decision on who's in and who's out, where does that language actually exist? And has the minister, as part of the review and the tabling of Bill 10, given any consideration to, I get the breadth of that determination on who's in, who's out?
Minister.
Honourable Chair, I guess there's no guidelines written in the code, but code does give the board authority to determine, based on case laws, jurisprudence of the past, and they have determined who form who should be excluded, who should be included. For example, confidential employees, employees with confidential information, HR people, the management people who have authority to hire and fire. So board will have that determination made through case law. So they just follow that, and that's how. Just like the courts, there's a jurisprudence, and they are relied upon under the new cases to determine whether they fit the criteria, based on the previous cases and the case law.
Member.
Okay, thank you, and through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister. So with respect to that, it doesn't sound like there's a very, well, maybe there is a specific definition, but it doesn't appear that it's clear, cut and dried as far as who's in and who's out. I guess with respect to if a certification vote is coming forward, or if an organization, a union, is in the process of signing cards for employees, is there an opportunity to make that determination beforehand, or do the cards get submitted and then the board has a look at it and tries to make a determination on whether all those members that have signed cards are eligible or not? And could the minister maybe just explain through this House what that process looks like, as far as, obviously input from the union organization, input from the employer? What does that process look like? How much time is involved? Is there a requirement for employers to hire lawyers to represent them through those discussions? Maybe if the minister could just provide a bit more clarity on what that process looks like.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I will give you a bit of high level, description of how this whole system works. If the union applies for certification, the board will appoint an officer, and the board will go and meet with the union organizer, and they will look at the card, the employer, the officer have those cards or the membership forms, and they will meet with the union organizer and say, okay, you have this many, you brought it to us. Then they will go to the employer and they will ask for their payroll record. And then questions are asked, these employees and their job descriptions. And then the board will make a determination whether the union has sufficient support. And sometimes there is a dispute where the employer will say this person does this and this, not knowing whether that person has signed up card or not. But based on the information provided by the employer, the board have to make a determination whether the union who may have signed that person, who is in question now by the employer, that there may be a hearing. And the hearing will, through the hearing, the decision will be made who should be, which employee should be part of the unit and which employee should be excluded. And then if many times the vote takes place and the ballot box is sealed. And when the decision is made, the ballot box is open. And then if that particular person's vote is in the ballot box, the decision already made whether that person should have the right to vote or not, if there was a secret ballot vote. But if there is as we are proposing, 55% majority, then again, that decision will be moved by the board that 55% of the appropriate unit has signed membership forms, then this certification will be granted. But if there's a dispute about, different employees should not be in the bargaining unit, on the other side, they argue, no, they should be in then there's a hearing. Then the panel will through the hearing from both sides, yes, most of the time, employer hire a lawyer and the union sometimes do their own representation or they hire their lawyers as well. Then the determination is made.
Members.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thank you to the Minister for that explanation. Can the Minister share with this House what the timing of that process might look like? So assuming that there may be concerns presented by either the union organization or by the employer with respect to the validity of different certification cards or membership cards that are submitted, how much time would an employer or the union have to make their case? And the Minister had suggested that there may be a potential hearing. Who makes a determination of whether a hearing is required? So I'm just trying to understand, if an employer, for example, has brought forward legitimate concerns, can the board just make their own determination and move forward with certification? Or if the employer expresses concern, are they deserving of a hearing at their request? Or is it up to the board's discretion to determine whether the employer is entitled to a hearing or not, and then what that length of time is? The Minister had spoken earlier about some of the movements of the previous legislation with respect to certification votes going from 10 days to 5 days, and I'm just wanted to have a bit more clarity on how much time either the union or the businesses would have to state their case, to potentially negotiate and come to a final resolution with the board, or if it actually goes to a formal hearing.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The process is that if there's a dispute, either the employer or the union can initiate and file for hearing, but it's up to the board to decide that hearing is warranted, and then that process takes place between the board and their, the employer union representatives or their lawyers, and they find appropriate time to bring the witnesses, bring the evidence, and just like the court case, and then there's no clock for that or time limit for that. Some hearing may end within 2 hours, other may take 2 days, but it's just based on the complexity of the situation. And so that's the process is. Nothing is changed with these bills, but that's, I mean, as the member asked, and I'm just trying to give you an overview how that system works. It is a bit more clear, and there's a bit more clarity when you go to the single step. If the 55% membership signed, then and the board is satisfied, hey, they've got 65%, although there's a dispute with 2 employees, it's not going to make any difference. So they would grant certification, and because if it's not going to impact the outcome. So I think that's the way that whole process works. But many cases, if there's a doubt that because the employer is making arguments that union may not have 55%, because there are 3 or 4 employees that the union have included to make it 56%, for example, then the board will order a vote in many cases that they may not have 55%. So then the vote, the ballot box is sealed, then the hearing will take place, and after the decision determined the appropriateness of the unit, then those ballots will be counted. So, Mr. Chair, I'm advised, and there is a desire in this House to have a bio break. So I request about 10-minute break.
We will recess briefly. I call the committee back to order. We are considering clause by clause Bill 10, Labor Relations Code Amendment Act 2022. On clause 3, I recognize the member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. So just before the bio break, I believe the minister referred to it as, we were asking about this specifics, and I guess where the Labour Board can make the determination internally whether it would actually go to a hearing or not. And through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, just for a further point of clarity, I just want to ensure that the Minister, in his response, I believe indicated that the Board could determine that they are satisfied with respect to the information, questions either raised by the employer or the union have been put forward, that the Board may make that internal determination that there is not a requirement for a hearing. And I just wanted to just, I guess, confirm that that is the case, that if there is either a union or employer that is unhappy with the outcome, that they do not have, or maybe they do have that opportunity to actually require and request a specific hearing at a later date. So if the Minister could just provide a bit of certainty on that answer.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So, member, I'm just going to offer the member that these are the regular board procedures that takes place for the last number of years and will continue on. But if the member wish to have a briefing on the board process and how all that process work, we can make our staff available to go over what the process actually looks like and what happens once the application is made and from the beginning to the end. And when the hearing is allowed, what can parties do? They can put submissions, written submissions. The board will determine to look at those written submissions and make their decisions. And once the decision is made, then there is an appeal system for that. But the board will determine whether the hearing is needed. If the board is satisfied that the appropriate unit exists and that there's sufficient support, in the appropriate unit, based on the investigation that they have conducted, they will grant certification. And but parties can still exercise their right to put submissions in, and the board will determine whether to comply with their request to hold a hearing. Again, hearings of different types takes place. If they need some evidentiary evidence, the witnesses are to be brought in. There will be oral hearings, perhaps, but other time they may ask for written submissions. I think it's the board determined based on the particular application and the circumstances around it, how to proceed. And I think that process is there forever, and it's going to stay there. I mean, nothing's going to change as a result of this, but the only thing changing here is that the second step of reconfirming support isn't needed anymore if board is satisfied that 55% of the bargaining unit have signed membership cards.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the offer of a further briefing from the Minister, and I'll certainly take him up on that. But this particular legislation is a significant departure from the opportunity for workers to have a secret ballot. I think that we all appreciate that when you're standing in that ballot box and you're checking off whether you're moving forward or not, that's nobody's business but the worker. But as that, or this legislation is actually a departure from the requirement for a secret ballot where there's union cards signed up or membership cards signed by 55% or more of workers, the determination of who can vote takes on a whole new meaning of importance. And so that's why I think that it's worthy to have some further clarification with respect to who is eligible to actually sign a membership card, who is not, who makes the determination at the end of the day on which ones are accepted and which ones are not. And the Minister has indicated that is the Labour Board. Through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, if the Labour Board make a ruling with respect to certification, and the Minister has indicated that there is an appeal process that's available. If the board makes a determination with respect to certification, and let's just assume that the decision is to move forward with certification, is the certification immediate and any appeals, just what the time frame would be for those appeals? Or is the certification actually put on hold until such time as that appeal process is fully fleshed out?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. My understanding is, I'm advised that if the board is satisfied that the bargaining unit, there's an appropriate bargaining unit and enough support is there, they will issue certification. And that certification is from that day on. But if somehow they are asked to reconsider their decision because denial of natural justice, it's pretty narrow. I think I have not heard, it's not that probably never happened, but I've never heard once the board determines there's a certification enough support that board, through reconsideration have overturned that. But if they do, then it's overturned on that day when that second decision comes to reconsider, and they can overturn. So that from that point on, it's not. But you're talking about days between the two because your certification is granted because the board has done their supposedly the investigation and came to conclusion that the appropriate bargaining unit exists and there's a sufficient support for the union. But then if there is some evidence exists that they didn't consider, they have to reconsider and overturn, then the certification will end on that day.
Member.
Thank you, through your honorable chair, to the minister. So I know that ministers don't like hypotheticals, but I think that in this case it is important. Let's assume a corporation has 100 employees that are deemed to be part of the bargaining unit, because I know not all employees, management, for example, are not part of a potential bargaining unit. Let's assume there's 100 employees that are part of the bargaining unit. Union recruiters or organizers go out and they sign memberships. Quite often, the employer may not even be aware that this is being undertaken. They submit these 55, or let's just say 60 cards. They've got a little bit extra work done. They got the 60 cards and they present those to the labor board. Labor board contacts the employee or the company and asks for a list of those that I'm assuming they'd provide, or they'd request which employees are management and which ones are regular workers. And the board would have a look at the cards that are presented from the union organizer, or the agent, I guess, acting on behalf of the union. They'd have a look at the cards, and they'd have a look at the list of employees, and they would check to make sure that all those cards were signed by those that were eligible for as part of the bargaining unit. And if the labor board makes a determination that 55% or more have signed cards, certification is immediate. Through you, Honourable Chair, Mr. Minister, just want to confirm that that's kind of the process that's undertaken.
Minister.
Correct.
Member.
Great, thank you very much. And I think as we get into clause 4, when it comes to card check, likely we'll have some additional questions. But while we're still on clause 3, there's an additional section, and it notes here, so due to the changes, section 22 bracketed 2 now becomes section 22 bracketed 1, and section 22 bracketed 3 becomes section 22.2, and section 22 bracketed 2 has the following language added. And it says under B, may decide the question without regard to the Constitution and bylaws of the trade union. Through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, can the Minister advise what the rationale is around this additional language and how it actually impacts the determination of the board in real terms, or in an example? Maybe the Minister might be able to provide an example of how that might apply or play out with respect to clause 3.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I'm advised that the board do not consider union constitution today when they're determining the appropriateness of the bargaining unit. The determination is made based on the evidence of membership. And they don't want to deny any worker right to join a union just because union constitution have some antiquated language that so-and-so should not be signed on Sunday, or the worker should not be working on Sunday. I mean, just throwing that example, but the board does not consider that as now. And this language existed before 2001. It's not something totally new and brand new that we're bringing up. It was there to allow the workers the right to association, and without any restriction by the employer or by the union constitution. So we are putting that language back in there, that if the appropriate unit exists, the sufficient support is there, then nothing should stand in the way, union constitution or employer policy or anything, and the certification will be granted if they meet the requirement of the code.
Member.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The Minister references this language being in existence back in 2001. Well, that was 21 years ago. That was a couple decades ago. I'm having a hard time understanding where this might actually come into play. The Minister gave an example that there may be a constitution, a union constitution, or bylaws that actually would maybe restrict a member from belonging to another union. Through you, Honorable Chair, to the Minister, can the Minister confirm, does that actually exist? Is there that type of language where a union organization would say, if you're joining my union, you are precluded from belonging to any other unions or seeking employment with any other union organization? I'm having a hard time understanding why this is here, and so maybe the Minister has another example that he might be able to share with this House where this particular language would actually be of value or benefit to protecting workers' rights in the province.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. To the member, through you, Honorable Chair, I don't have any examples of any language that may exist, but again, I'm advised that with the return to single-step certification, the anticipation, as it was back then, is that employer will increasingly challenge the validity of the membership evidence, including by submitting arguments regarding how membership cards relate to internal union rules, including the union's bylaws and constitution. This provision will assist the parties in understanding the certification process by clarifying that when assessing membership evidence, the Labor Relations Board has the authority to continue their long-standing practice of deciding this question by looking to the requirements prescribed by the Labor Relations regulations without calling into question the Constitution and bylaws of the union. So the board right now have that policy. They don't, allow arguments from employer or the union that such and such members should not membership evidence should not be considered because union policy, union rules, or union constitution somehow doesn't allow that member to become that union. So it just delays the process. It has no bearing right now because the board does not consider that right now. So we are basically putting the language to clarify to both sides that argument should not be brought forward because there are rules now that it will not be considered.
Member.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. And I appreciate the Minister for his response. It is yet to satisfy me with respect to why it is being included in Bill 10. If there's no examples of where it would come into play or any hardship or challenges, I'm really trying to have a better understanding of what the intention of this particular clause is. The Minister, in his response, referenced membership. And so I'm assuming that if we have a look at the potential certification of a trade unit for an employer, there's been, and we'll in section 4 get into a lot more detail around card check. But is it possible that a member could be determined to be giving their agreement to collective bargaining or moving forward with union certification without actually signing a union membership card for that specific company or that specific union? Because, and sorry, I'm not trying to be cute here, Honorable Chair, just there's been a lot of discussion around card check and the requirement for members within a 180-day period to sign a union certification card or a membership application. That's very specific. That's something where a worker has to physically actually put their name and date, I guess, on that card saying that, yes, I want to be part of this union. Membership is a very different consideration. And so just wanted to have some clarity. If a worker has signed and become a member of another union previously, is there any opportunity for the board to consider that membership in any way to take the place or give direction to the board that a worker that may not have signed a specific union membership card for that filing, if that worker is somehow going to be counted and determination made that they were in approval or in agreement based on a previous membership, existing or previous, with another organization?
Minister.
Go on, Chair. To answer member's question through you, Mr. Chair, I think the example the member used is that, if they have a membership in some union before, but the board will determine the membership evidence based on the union membership that this member at that particular time signed and the union applying for the certification. So if that union has a sufficient members in that particular unit at that particular time, and when they're making the application, that's the membership that is considered, not some other previous membership somewhere. I think I'm trying to come up with an example. I think the reason where we were advised by the board was because they have a long-standing policy and not to consider any argument coming from mostly employer side that this membership should not be considered because union bylaw says this. And I think with my own experience, I can go back, and it could be a reason that why some employer continue to have that argument. Some unions, many years ago, would only organize in certain economy, certain sectors. IWA would only stick to the forest industry, and a steel worker would stick to the steel, or the car manufacturer, the auto workers will just stick to that. But it has opened up in the last 40, 50 years. All unions are signing members in any sector, any economy they like to, or when they're approached for interest. And it must have been that some employer made argument that unions bylaws suggest that they will only stick to the forest industry, for example, but this is a rope manufacturer, so it doesn't fit their bylaws. There must be some cases, but right now, it's a board's existing policy, not to consider bylaws a constitution of the union. And on the advice of the board chair, they said, to clarify, this language existed before, put that in here so that we don't waste everybody's time and money by having these arguments when we don't consider it anyway.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. In the Minister's response, he indicated that the board had provided this recommendation. Through you to the Minister, was there a written submission of recommendations from the Labour Board with respect to the development of this legislation? This specific clause, the Minister's admission, was recommended to be inserted into the legislation. Was that provided in writing, and were there any other list of recommendations that was provided by the Labour Board to the Minister with respect to the drafting of this legislation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. No, there was no written submissions by Labour Board. Just to do a due diligence, when we were drafting the language for these changes, Ministry reached out to the under confidentiality agreement to see if the language we're proposing would work. And that's when suggestion was made that this would clarify their existing policy if we include this language. And because that's how they operate right now. And then they drew our attention, to the Ministry attention, this language existed before, and it is appropriate to have that language included now because that's our policy. Although, between 2001 and now, until we brought Bill 30, or this language, there was no such language, but the board continued with that policy. So they are saying it will, clarify the board's position, which board already practice anyway.
Member.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and thanks to the Minister. The Minister indicated there was no written submission from the Chair of the Labour Board, that I'm assuming that was just a verbal communication. Through Honorable Chair to the Minister, is that the typical approach for board chairs of Labour boards or other organizations to just provide just kind of verbal input with respect to the development? Or would it be more typical for there to be written communication, a correspondence back and forth between the chair of the Labour Board and the Minister's office, just to ensure that they've got things correct? And I guess, and just in further to that, through your Honourable Chair to the Minister, was the final draft of this legislation provided to the chair of the Labour Board for review to, I guess, provide the chair the opportunity to, I guess, satisfy him or herself that this language actually meets the policy objective that the board has? And I think maybe just further to that, when the Minister references the current policy of the Labour Board, is that a written policy that's detailed, and was the Minister provided a copy of that written policy, or is this just more a policy and practice that was communicated to him from the board chair?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The way it happened is when we were finalizing the language, there were some technical questions, and we want to run it by under the, the non-disclosure agreement. And she went through clause by clause, and she identified that particular area. She said it would be good to have that language that existed here before, and she identified what that language is, and it is to clarify our current policy, and so that should go in, and so we ministry looked at that language and put that in, and here we are.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Through you to the Minister, did the board chair indicate that this was a written policy that currently exists within the in the Labour Board, or was this just tribal knowledge, general understanding, kind of a verbal policy, or was it an actual written policy that she was relying upon in giving direction to the Minister?
Minister.
No, we were advised, I mean, like we have canvassed this type of question before, where is the written policy about who can be part of the bargaining unit. These are determined through case law and the jurisprudence. And similarly here, there would be case laws and jurisprudence available, and so that's how we were advised that this is the language that need to be in there to clarify our position, and that's the board position, not to, just to do what this language is directing parties to do.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Through you to the Minister. Did the board chair provide you with a copy of the case law or the jurisprudence that she relied upon in providing this advice to the Minister?
Minister.
No.
Member.
Did the Minister ask or seek clarity on the reasons and rationale, the justification that the chair was providing this information, this recommendation, this change to legislation to the Minister? I would certainly hope that the Minister would have been looking for some substantive information rather than just taking a recommendation of the chair, that there would have been at least a question with respect to what policy she was looking to, or, as the Minister has indicated now, case law or jurisprudence. Through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, did the Minister even seek out any information with respect to what the chair was relying upon in offering this advice to the Minister, which was accepted by the Minister and actually included in the legislation that's before us?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Just to clarify, Minister did not meet with or talk to the board chair. It was the ministry, my ministry folks who were putting the language together and to come back and advise me, and they were satisfied that that language makes sense, and it was in place before 2001, and it is consistent with the 55% and that practice that continue on, not to consider union bylaws and constitution to determine the appropriateness of the bargaining unit. So it made sense to me that that language should go in, and that's why it's in here.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Now, the chair of the Labour Board, I don't have a lot of knowledge with respect to how the Labour Board operates, but I would imagine although there is a chair, the chair likely reports to other board members. Through your Honourable Chair to the Minister, did the chair meet or consult or in other way obtain the acceptance or support of other board members, or was it just solely the board chair's recommendation that led staff to include her recommendation in the legislation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. It was, my understanding is only the board chair under the NDA, and she's not allowed to talk to anybody. And it was the language that was there, so we want to be consistent and want to confirm that the policy of the board still continues, and that policy was confirmed still continues, and that's why we put that language in.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Well, the Minister initially indicated that it was a policy of the Labour Board which led to the inclusion of this language. Then under further scrutiny, the minister confirmed that it actually wasn't a written policy, that it was more reference to case law or jurisprudence, were the minister's answers. And it's surprising that the ministry staff would, and I appreciate that there's value and necessity in reaching out to the current board chair to get recommendations and advice, but it doesn't appear that the rationale or reasons or justification were even provided to ministry staff. Because when we first started discussing this particular section, and I asked the question of the minister, could you give some examples? What problem are we trying to solve? There was none that were forthcoming. So it appears that the board chair, on her sole recommendation, is able to dictate and direct language that's included in this legislation without any justification, reasons or rationale, no written policy, and apparently no consultation with other board members. Now, I appreciate other board members may not have been under an NDA, but I would assume that the board chair certainly would have the opportunity, if she felt it was important, to have discussions with her board, so she is not just solely reliant on directions to the ministry, that other board members could have easily signed an NDA specific to discussions around this particular clause. But through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, I'm going to give the Minister one more opportunity to provide some clarity around the work of his ministry staff in obtaining very important information that is included in legislation, the scrutiny around those decisions, and I guess, and further that, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, can the Minister share with this House when he was made aware that it was solely the recommendation of the board chair that led to the inclusion of this specific section of the legislation?
Minister.
Okay, thank you. A couple of things I probably should clarify. So I'm advised that we put the language together based on, what the language was in prior to 2001, and there are other people involved, like the Legislative Council drafting the languages, and then she confirmed that that language need to be there and that it is the right thing to do because it confirms the board policy, the existing policy. Now, member, you need to, I think, through you, Mr. Chair, need to understand that the board develop policies through cases and how the cases are decided over time. And that's how the policies are determined. And there is a number of policies that the board adopt and continue on, but there's no written list of policies. You know, what constitute, for example, the bargaining unit, who should be and who should be. That is also determined over a period of time through the case laws and precedents, and then they follow that. I think, I'm not a lawyer, but others in that profession perhaps can guide us both, that in the courts, many things happen the similar way. Once the decisions are made, arbitrations, you go to arbitration, there are many cases are determined there. For example, what is a just cause for termination? And there are thousands of cases in the library. What constitutes just law? There's no written policy. There, you can draw from those cases, but then again, each case becomes a little different under the same circumstances. And so that's how the arbitrators are guided by the jurisprudence and the previous cases. Similarly here, the board, take some cases and then they make a decision, and many times that becomes the policy for the board going forward. So that's the way my understanding is that the board work. And this policy, we may have to go back to see when that policy was determined through some cases or case, and then they continue to follow that policy, and they rely on those type of policy that is established through the case laws and precedents. So that's my understanding. Not a lawyer, but that's the way I understand that the system work there. And if you go to the labor board and ask for, what is the policy about this, about this, about this, they may give you a guidance based on the previous cases, but you will probably not see a big list out there about what is the appropriate unit, for example, there are some guidelines and procedures listed there, but I'm just going by my own imprint. But this one here is the language that was there before 2001, and we put that in, and just to get the technical advice from the board chair to make sure the language we're proposing on all of the entire package, and she confirmed that language makes sense to leave it in there.
Member.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Well, the minister is doing a great job of trying to confuse me, I think. When I initially asked the question with respect to this particular clause, the minister was unable to provide any reasons or rationale, and it was the minister who indicated that it was actually the recommendation of the board chair of the labor board. The minister is now indicating that it wasn't the board chair that recommended the language, that it was actually staff that moved forward with the recommendation and put the language in the initial draft that then went to the board chair for review. Well, if that is the case, then the minister should, at the very least, be able to provide some rationale and justification for why it's in here. If his ministry staff were the ones that included this specific section, this addition to the legislation, which is a change, which goes back to wording that existed 21 years ago, there must have been a reason, a rationale, a justification for why you would take language from legislation 21 years ago and supplant it into this legislation today. So through you, Honorable Chair, to the minister, can the minister provide some level of clarity around why this particular wording is important enough to be included and brought now into this particular legislation?
Minister.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Chair. I think I answered the question in many different ways because it was asked in many different ways. That language existed prior to 2001 when the single-step certification existed. We picked up the same language from there and implemented it here. And when we went to the board to confirm whether this language is the right language to move forward for some technical reasons, and the board chair confirmed that that language makes sense to clarify the parties. I can also say that amendment will assist, but this is what the reason is, that amendment will assist the parties in understanding the certification process. The clarification provided by the amendment is necessary given that the return to single-step certification may result in increased challenges regarding the validity of the membership evidence. So that's the reason, and we want to simplify the process. If the membership support is there, then over 55%, which is large majority, clear majority, then the certification would proceed rather than having the process delay through more confusions and challenges. Mr. Speaker, I move that, looking at the clock, I move that committee rise, report progress, and ask leave to sit again.
Members, the vote is about to take place. The minister has moved that the committee report progress and ask leave to sit again. All those in favor indicate aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion is carried. This committee stands adjourned.